The Pulse of Providence with Steph Machado on WPRI.com.
Hello, and thanks for watching Pulse of Providence. I'm Steph Machado, and today our guest has been on the Providence City Council since 1997 and is about to start his final year as the council president. Council President John Igliozzi, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Steph, and Happy New Year to you and your viewers and everybody
Thank you so much. Thank you. And so let's just start out. Tell me, what are your priorities for your final year after, 24, 25 years on the council?
Well, let's say, first of all, it's been an honor and a privilege to even been elected by my constituents for these many years and to represent them in the city of Providence throughout the years and been part of some of the, some of the great achievements in the city, from, a lot of the buildings from the Providence Place Mall to the Masonic Temple to all the good stuff there's been a lot of good stuff that happened in the city. And I'm proud to have been part of that. And we still have a lot of work to do. Going into this final year, this legislative year, we actually have a lot of things that are going to have impact for the next 10 years in the city of Providence. What's on the horizon is some serious legislative issues. One, of course, is we got the revaluation of all the tax property again throughout the entire city. And we all know how that plays out, where because of, the wild valuations, property's been going up in value, that it has an impact on taxes. So we have to really watch that and try to make sure it's done hopefully fair and equitable to limit the impact it will have on, let's call it as the people have the most difficult economic situations in the city of Providence. And as you know, that's a majority of the people here. Another big event that's happening in the legislative session this year is we're going to be doing the redistricting of the ward boundaries, reworking the ward boundaries. As you know, the city's population has increased by approximately about 20,000. So now went from 178 to 198. And with that changes the dynamics of all the wards. So ward boundaries are going to shift this upcoming this legislative session for the next election, not for this one in November, but it's going to shift. And some people lived in one ward, it's going to live in another ward. So that's a big issue. So we need to make sure it's done correctly, and we hire a good consultant who knows what they're doing, and make sure it's done fairly and transparent, so people understand when they're not living in that ward anymore, or in that political neighborhood anymore, that the reason why is because of the shifting of population. So that's a big event that's going to have an impact for 10 years on how the democracy is run in the city of Providence. Another, a big event too is that we have, once again, it's the reworking of the city charter. And as you know, the city charter is the city's constitution. It's how we govern ourselves, how our democracy and our republic works here. And we're now in the middle. Last night, we just had the first charter review commission, which now we're going to review the entire charter. And we're going to be looking towards, seeing if we can make it stronger and better, make our democracy stronger and better. And I'll just give a couple examples. This talks about once again doing, a council at large positions again. So there's a little more representation throughout the city. Also, we need to talk about addressing some of the issues when we have, there's always this question of lifetime appointments in city government. And it seems to be always questioned that someone could actually have a lifetime appointment without ever having any accountability. And that's a problem. So that's another issue where we're going to be looking at, plus a whole host of other ones. We have a great charter commission that we put together, all walks of life, all parts of the city of Providence. So we're excited to get them into the scrum, get their ideas. We're also going to do charrettes throughout the city to get the constituents and the people of Providence any ideas what they think should change, or maybe just simply amended or made better in the city charter. Because the city charter governs us all. So those are some big events just for the next 10 years that we're going to impact when I'm gone, and future mayors and future councils.
Right. And, last time that the city charter review happened, there were 10 questions that were brought to the voters in November to update the city charter. 2 times ago is when we got term limits for city councilors, which is why you will no longer be a city councilman after this year.
As well as for mayors too, by the way.
And for the mayor, correct. You mentioned at-large council people being a possibility. That's when a council member represents the whole city instead of just their geographic ward. Is that something that you support?
Well, I think, it's important because now we have term limits. I think it's important to start creating a farm team for candidates to be future mayors. it's becoming very costly and expensive to run for office, right? So if you have a process where someone could run for council, then eventually run for council at large, and then as they can build up a bigger constituency and let's call it, and a bigger, the ability to raise money to run a citywide campaign to get that notoriety, that then we possibly will have even better options, opportunities when people do run for mayor, right? You'll have a broader selection of people versus just people who have all the money right off the bat. So it's a way in which someone could matriculate from, entry level all the way to the mayor's seat without necessarily having a lot of money. So I think it's good to help expand it. As you also know, that since the population's growing, more representation is better than less. So council at large positions have a real, I think it's a real, has a real good opportunity to address those two kinds of issues, right? Greater representation, and also, like I said, a farm team system where they can, people can grow into the job and then eventually have those types of skills we need when people become mayors of Providence. Because sometimes just winning a popularity contest does not mean you will be a good mayor and have management skills to run the city.
What other charter changes would you consider?
Well, I think, there's stuff that I think there's some like technical stuff we're going to be looking at. And I think also there's stuff like, as you know, I mentioned earlier, there's always this conversation about when appointments get appointed that they don't have to be reappointed every term. And that seems to be a little confusing because therefore an appointment can be a lifetime appointment without ever being vetted again.
Do you have an example of a position?
Perfect example is the Commissioner of Public Safety. Commissioner of Public Safety hasn't been reappointed in 8 years. And so there's been different mayors and different councils, and yet they have not had the opportunity to vet, especially the council has not had, and the people have an opportunity to vet, and the public hasn't had an opportunity to vet and hear from that appointment. And because there's been this, and I disagree with this interpretation, that they just stay on until they either get indicted or resign.
There's also been some talk about moving to an elected school board. Is that something you'd support?
Well, definitely, as you know, the school department and the school system is totally changing dynamically. I think that is definitely something we can entertain, but I think also we have to have the realization that I don't really think the school department's ever going to really come back to the city in the near future, because let's call it like it is. I mean, the state's only had it control maybe about 2 years from now, but they've been in COVID years. So they really haven't been able to really kickstart the turnaround, really get into that scrum and get things working, because COVID has been devastating for all these school districts across the country. And the loss of learning and the ability to get it, a system that was already in trouble to try to just get your hands around this and try to implement the programs you need to turn it around. COVID has really set us back. So I think it's important that we got to support the state. We got to get the state, help them with whatever tools and resources they need to help turn the school system around. And when it's in the right place, then the city can maybe possibly think about bringing it back. As for an elected school board, I don't think that's, no harm, no foul. I don't think that can hurt at all. In some parts, I think maybe it's better, because this way, once again, now you have a group of people who will be campaigning. There'll be it won't necessarily be a political appointment, right? And right now, it's like it's a group of people who get together, take applications, then they submit applications to the mayor, and the mayor then submits appointments to the council. It's more like an appointment process. Maybe it's better to have an elected school board, and I think that's something we should seriously consider. But I have to say something. We also have to be cognizant of the state law. If we do that, then we have to separate the tax consequences, because we can't allow the school board to initiate and put undue tax burden on the taxpayer without having the accountability. So we have to make sure that if we go that way, it has to be done correctly. So there's no imbalance in how you deal with the taxes, taxing the people of Providence.
Okay, you had also previously mentioned to me that you thought maybe something needs to change about section 403 of the charter, which is the section that was almost used to hold a public trial against the city clerk. He ended up resigning, and so that hearing didn't go forward. But what do you think might need to change about that section of the charter?
Well, that's a perfect example. Actually, we were going to do that almost 2 times this year. One against the chair, chairperson, the mayor wanted, and of course the city clerk. The problem with the 403 is that I think when it comes to these types of appointments, they should be subject to all the other normal labor laws and applications like any other employee of the city of Providence. You know, if they're acting inappropriately, it should be addressed, and they should be subject to the same types of labor disciplinary actions or determination like anything else. The fact that we would actually have to do a full-blown labor public hearing, the council runs it, and have this process, like it's kind of like this kind of quasi trial, but run by the council, in which in this particular case, this had to do with allegations of hostile work environment and intimidation. And what was really concerning for the council in particular was that the witnesses, the people that stepped up, the women that came in from the clerk's office that stepped up and had the courage to do that, to talk about how they were being treated, that they would now have to go to a public process in a council meeting and talk about what they were, what they had to go through. I mean, it was pretty disturbing that we'd have to go through those types of lengths to address such a serious situation.
It sounds like
because 403 was telling us we had to do this huge public airing out process, when therefore, if you could just simply defer to the traditional internal disciplinary labor process, which I think is a better way, then it would not create a chilling effect, by the way, of people who would be fearful of coming forward saying, I have to now do this public process. So it has a chilling effect, on people who feel that they're being wronged in city government. And that's not the purpose of city government. We're supposed to be shining a light on these types of issues, and we need to address it quickly, cleanly. And in that particular case, that went on way too long. And if we went to a traditional disciplinary action, most likely he would have been fired immediately.
But it sounds like that's the point of that section of the charter, so that when political leadership changes, you can't just snap your fingers and get rid of an appointee who in this case was elected by the full council. The way the charter's written, the full council has to vote him out rather than.
You're correct, but I think you're making it too simple. It's not new leadership that snap your fingers. If someone is doing something incorrectly as an employee for the city, they would have the same rights and titles of any other city employee. They have due process rights. So they'd have the due process rights, but under the labor process.
Through HR, you mean?
So they're not, they have the same rights, same ability to defend themselves, but it's in a labor process, not in a public scrutiny where witnesses, in this case, all of these female witnesses who claim they've been, hostile work environment and intimidated, right? That they would have to now go through this public scrutiny. So it created a chilling effect, potential chilling effect, where people who feel they're being wronged will not come forward because of the 403. So we have to address that. There's something wrong with that. No one's talking about removing some of the snap of the finger. Now, if an at-will employee, there are people that at-will employees in city government, the mayor's chief of staff, there's a bunch of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're just saying that if you have an appointment, they usually be subject similar to the same labor rules and regulations like any other union or non-union employee in city government. So that's fairer by the person who's claiming they're being wronged, right? Filing grievance, as well as the person who may potentially is being brought up on allegations, right? So it's a private process, the labor process, is due process given to all, and it's out of the hands of the political spectrum. See, that's the difference. See, what happens is that process remained in the political spectrum. What we're talking about is putting it back in the legal labor spectrum, putting it in that form. And that's the proper place for that. So actually, I'm taking the politics out of the process, not putting it in.
I also want to ask about, you appointed yourself to the Charter Review Commission, and you were elected the chair of that commission last night. I don't believe that the city council president 10 years ago also chaired the Charter Review Commission. Is that appropriate for you to be the chair of that commission?
Well, of course it is. I'm an elected official. I represent this is a republic. I represent thousands of people in the city of Providence. I represent the interests of all of the council. So council presidents can pick and choose. In fact, Evelyn Fognoli, I believe, was a member of the Charter Review Commission way back when. And I believe she was a council person at that time. I think maybe she may have been the president back in 80. No, I think she was in the council back then. So that's nothing. I don't think it's nothing. There's no problem with it. In fact, since I've been living with the charter for so long, I think I bring an awful lot to the commission, an understanding to the process. Some of the outstanding issues that I have run across throughout my years of being a council person, of where we should be adjusting or potentially proposing adjustments to the charter. So no, I don't think so at all. In fact, we're just doing our job.
I want to move on to the American Rescue Plan Act money. Mayor Lorza proposed yesterday to spend the rest of it, nearly $124 million on a wide variety of areas, the largest chunk being housing and revenue replacement. What do you make of his proposal if you've had a chance to review it so far?
Let's talk about it. I've had conversations with the mayor and my financial team, so we knew about this anyway. So just let's talk. So it's approximately about 124 million, right? And about 124 million, about 29 million is going to go to revenue loss, which will be for the 2023 budget and 2024 budget. Mm-hmm. And then about 29 million for affordable housing. As for the council, I haven't any council issues where, addressing the revenue, because that's what this money is really about. How do we help the taxpayer, right? I mean, the COVID has had an impact on our revenue losses. So by utilizing this money to address the revenue loss also helps limit any tax consequences. So we all agree with that. And we're all going to do our part to hold the line on taxes this coming budget. And so we're going to do that part. Second, affordable housing, as we know, is a wildfire issue in the city of Providence, and we need to address it. We just talked about revaluation. Valuations of people's property are going to go up. So that means affordable housing is going to be more difficult to achieve. We need to invest in affordable housing. So my council colleagues, myself, we agree with doing those two big chunks. And we agreed weeks ago with the administration on that. What comes really down to is roughly, what do you do with I think it's left about 65 million or so. What do you do with the rest of that? Now, let me just say this. One thing I am concerned about is that in 2025, that budget, and I don't want to leave the next mayor, the next council, we're projecting a $25 million deficit. And that is a concern. So I think we need to potentially readjust the revenue loss column and maybe add a little more money to that revenue loss column to help the next administration, next council with that projected deficit in 2025, about 2025 million.
But do you think there's going to be a revenue loss in 2025 related to the pandemic? Because that's what this is supposed to be for, revenue that the city lost because of COVID. So, hotel and meal taxes, those types of things. You think in 2025, we might have a deficit because the city has financial problems, but you think it would still be a pandemic related revenue loss?
Oh, well, it's all part of it. Let's take a step back. First of all, right now, the 5-year plan is projecting a revenue deficit about $25 million in 2025. And that's all related towards this. Now, don't forget, we lost that revenue, and and I don't know if you know, but the city and the businesses aren't at full capacity yet. We're just not there yet, right? Hotels, and if you've been checking, airfares shutting down, travel's shutting down. If this is affecting today and tomorrow. I mean, we're still in the woods. We're not out of it yet. And I think we need to be very pragmatic with this money and also be fiscally responsible with this money. And let me say something. As you know, we have to allocate the money by 2024 and have it all spent by 2026. So that means we can create that additional buffer in 2024 for the 2025 budget, because we need to protect it. Now, if it ends up, things turn around, let's say a year from now, everything's just going great, everybody's flying into the city of Providence. You got millions and millions of visitors. Hotels are brimming full of people. All the restaurants are opening. We're opening more and more restaurants. I'm with you. Then now you're good. Now you allocate that money for other stuff like infrastructure needs for the city. But we have to be very pragmatic, and we also cannot allow ourselves into a false insecurity, right? Government and leadership is about protecting today, but also protecting the future, right? So part of that is we need to reconsider using some of that additional money and beefing up that revenue loss column to protect the people of Providence, by the way, in the state of Rhode Island, for a unintended potential monumental deficit and or tax consequences. And that's just being financially prudent and responsible.
Okay, so you might want to put more into the revenue replacement category. I want to ask you about a couple of the other specific line items. The mayor proposed $2 million towards anti-violence. I know that's something you've been concerned about with the rise in violence recently in the city. That's a relatively small amount compared to the 124 million. Is that enough?
Well, that's a great question. So let's talk about, I mean, as you know, when we submit this plan, it's going to go to the finance committee. It's going to get fully vetted because it may not be enough, right? We want to make sure that it is. And luckily, this is the proposal, and now it's into the hands of the leadership. And, now it's our job as leaders of the city, the mayor and the council, and our fiduciary obligation to make sure the money is spent wisely. And so when we're going to vet it, we'll get more detail on what we're talking about. We may have to increase that. I don't think any council member would be against that. Now, let me say one other thing too. Another initiative that isn't in the thing that we are going to add, the city council is going to add to this ARPA money, is going to allocate money to hire an independent audit company who will do a bi-weekly report of accounting of every penny of all this money to make sure that everybody knows, from the council to the mayor to the public in particular, knows where the money went, who got the money, what they were going to do with it, did they spend the money correctly, did they not, and was it spent the right way. So part of this package is we're going to add money, so we're going to take a portion of that money to hire an independent audit company who's going to audit everybody's book. So let's say we give money to an organization. Let's say they give an organization $1 million. Well, that organization is going to be subject to an independent audit on a bi-weekly fashion, because we hope the organization does what they're supposed to do, but we all know sometimes things go awry, and we want to make sure we get ahead of it. And therefore we're not, a couple of years later, we find out that some money was misappropriated, right? And not spent the way it's supposed to. So that's one of the initiatives. Checks and balances and accountability of this money is an imperative to the council, and we're going to be adding that to this ARPA project.
Right, because people might not realize that just passing the ARPA ordinance is not the end of it. The city has to go out to RFP and have competitive bidding from organizations that are going to get the money. So you're saying you want to oversee how those organizations are spending it on these various priorities that are in the ordinance?
I'm saying I want to, but that's why we're going to hire an independent audit company. So the politics are out of it. So it's purely an objective financial accounting process. We have a legitimate accounting company, independent of everybody, who's going to come in. By the way, they're going to inspect whatever money the council spends. The council gets allocated money to do something, whatever, sidewalks or streets. That money's going to be in the accounting firm's going to be auditing that too.
What are you going to take away from in order to hire the accounting firm?
Well, I think there's a few $1 million in there for like administrative costs. So we need to make sure it's just not, that gives me concern, because that sounds like it potentially just going to be a lot of money given to one of the department heads in city government. We need to make sure that whatever it is that we allocate some of this money towards, I don't know how much, because we're going to have to RFP it, how much we have to allocate to an audit company, an audit firm to do this, because that's only the financially prudent thing to do. You have no choice, right? You're talking about a lot of money, and we want to make sure that people know that it's being spent responsibly, and there's no political skullduggery going on.
What do you make of the mayor's proposal to spend $10 million on reparations based on racial inequities during the pandemic?
Well, that's an interesting one. And I think one of the conversations I did have, Mayor, is that I think if you are going to go down that road, then we need to make sure we have a more inclusive group. I think he was just looking to have one organization, one race. I think it's important that all nationalities are represented on this group. There should be people from the Latino community, people from the Asian community, people from all different, disadvantaged groups, female groups, right? Should be represented in that process. I was concerned about the fact that it's kind of like it's a one conversation. I think if you're going to have a bigger impact, I think we need to be more inclusive of other nationalities, races, and by the way, sexualities, right? I mean, there have been people in the different, the LGBT community that had, unfair disadvantages in the COVID. So all those organizations be part of this conversation And that's one thing that I am concerned about, that I think we need to beef that up and add those organizations, make it more inclusive, make all those groups, make them more part of the process, part of the conversation. And then so it shouldn't be just a one conversation, it should be a multiple ones. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I'm looking to expand it and make it more inclusive.
The mayor, said he didn't want to be prescriptive about what the money would be spent for. So it's unclear if it would be direct payments to people or how it would be used. How would you envision that money used?
Well, I think the problem with that is I think that'd be financially irresponsible. You just can't give 4 or 5 people in the city of Providence $10 million and say you spend it how you want. Doesn't matter. There needs to be some criteria put forward, right? That's why we have a more inclusive group, probably have the group put together, maybe like they start narrowing down the field of what they think they'd like to do with the money. And then they come back to the finance committee and say, this is kind of what we're looking to do. We'd like to do this program, that program. Okay, and then we begin the financing process of it. But just to hand somebody $10 million and say, go do what you want, that's not what leadership does. We were elected to represent the people of Providence, and we need to be financially responsible with the money that we were entrusted with. Just to give them a blank check is very dangerous, and not that somebody may intentionally get into trouble, but unfortunately, if there's no criteria, things could get a little out of hand. So I think if anything, make the group more inclusive. The group has to, come up with a specific criteria, and then has to be vetted accordingly, and make sure it passes legal muster, make sure it makes sense, and then we'll do a process of how do we execute or implement their program and their planning, and then they'll give it to us, and then the city will RFP it to make sure the money is given to the right organization, and the independent audit company can audit them. So I think you look at it as the group, not to give them the money, but more as an advisory, and they can come up with ideas and give it to the council, and the council then can implement those ideas.
Okay.
That's to be safe, that's to be financially responsible for everybody involved.
And what's the timeline finally for potentially passing the ARPA ordinance? Are we talking weeks? Are we talking months?
Well, let's talk right now. Let's not, one thing we don't want to do. So you don't want to just do knee-jerk reactions and spend the money foolishly and unwisely. So we got the proposal from the mayor. Now the council has to drill down. Now the council has to do all the hard work, right? Now that we're going to go in there, the committee's going to have to drill down on it. We're going to have to get more particulars. Like you mentioned, you interviewed the mayor and you didn't get many details. Well, now it's the council's job. We have to get the details. And just when the council gets details, it's all on the record and it's all public. So the council will do its job to drill down, get the details, and find out exactly what we're talking about, where this money's going, who wants it for what and what reason, and then we'll make appropriate amendments and adjustments so it's fair, it's equitable, it's transparent, but there's accountability.
And it's under oath. It's under oath when the council asks questions.
It's under oath. You come to the finance committee, you're under oath. So there's no messing around. And I think it's important that we reassure the public and the people of Providence and the state of Rhode Island that the council is going to do its job to make sure we're, making accountability job one in the city government.
Okay, I want to move on to the Committee on Ward Boundaries. You mentioned it earlier, they're going to be redrawing the wards. I know they've been meeting and they were appointed last year and they've met 4 or 5 times, but when are there going to be maps, like draft maps that the public can look at and weigh in on?
I think it's because a little bit of the inexperience of some of the folks that started it. The reality is that you really can't start doing ward maps until 2 events happen. One, you need to have all the census material given to the city, and it has been, and I believe we haven't received all the broken down census material, which means specifically ward by ward, location by location, right? And it breaks it down. I think they just get in it. Second, there's a consultant being hired as we speak. You hire a consultant, a professional outfit. They all do it. We've done it. Council cities does that all the time. Every government does it. You hire a professional company. They know the rules, they know the laws, and basically it's here's the census, here's the breakdown. Where's the population? Where did it grow? Where did it decrease? And then they look at each ward, and then you're gonna start figuring out how, if you have to move ward boundary lines, right? But you also have to follow the law, which is you have to use natural boundaries, you have to use highway lines.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do an eclectic puzzle, as people in the public ether, jerry rigging, right? Jimmy
So is
Man.
that
No,
election data services that you're expecting to be hired, Kim Brace?
yeah, I believe that, I think that's the one, is that the one that did the
That's the one
RFP?
that does the state.
Whatever we did an RFP, if they're the awarding one, then that's who it is. So we're not, we don't choose who it is, we just RFP it.
And
So
are
that
you
company will then review all the data and then apply it and then start putting maps and together, and then that ward boundaries thing they'll come up with some final maps and say, okay, we can adjust here and here. I mean, it's about 20, like I said, 20,000 people, but last go round, the east side lost majority of the population in the 5th ward. So the east side boundaries had to move and shift. And like my ward was one of the ones that grew the most. So I had to shrink. My ward had to shrink. So I don't know where we are now and whose ward has to shrink or grow. And then you got to move population and you got to do it fairly and equitable.
And that's my question. So, the city charter requires a number of things, including that, where incumbents live is not taken into consideration, where political opponents live is not taken into consideration. The committee, the Ward Boundaries Committee this year is chaired by civilians, not elected officials. I'm wondering, how much are you going to be involved in deciding what the maps are going to look like?
No, it's got to do with the consultant. It's based on population, the consultants, and where they are. I mean, and one thing I am concerned is there's not enough full representation. There's no Latinos on that charter review commission, I believe, right? And
On the ward, you mean on the Ward Boundaries Committee? I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't have the list in front of me. So are you saying you want to change the members?
No, I don't want to change. What I do is, but I want to make sure that they're sensitive to the fact that the majority population is Latinos, the Hispanic population. So they need to, we need to make sure that everything's done fairly, and that's why this professional company will follow the law. So our job is to follow the law, in which we will.
Okay, and you don't have a sense of when we might start to see maps?
My impression is once the company gets hired, then they go in their laboratory and they start generating the maps on the computer, and and you gotta respect certain things. Like I said, there's federal law that you have to follow, and we're gonna defer to the law. I mean, that's what you have to do.
Okay, I want to make sure I ask you about your political future. You've been, considering running for, I think, multiple different offices potentially this fall. You said on Newsmakers the last time we had you on, you were looking at statewide office. Where are you on that? What office are you considering running for, or are you going to run for nothing?
So I've been meeting with my political team and my family and my supporters, and we've been talking about my future and how my pragmatic approach to governing. And we're looking at statewide. In the near future, I'll be making the appropriate announcement. But at this time, I'm not going to do it until I finish my due diligence with my supporters, family, and friends. And that's where we're looking for a statewide office.
Are you considering running for treasurer?
I just leave it at that. I'm looking for a statewide office.
Okay, but you will be on the ballot somewhere this fall. You're not staying out of it?
Well, if God willing, and if like I said, my pragmatic and reasonable approach to governing, and I'm just, I don't govern by extremism, nor do I govern through social media. So I'm kind of like, I'm this moderate, middle of the road office holder. And I think statewide, that's an attractive candidate this time. So I think people looking for more stability, a more rational, like I said, pragmatic approach to governing. So that's where we are.
There's only so many statewide offices. Is it governor? Is it lieutenant governor?
Like I said, you'll hear in the near future.
I want to move on to talk about COVID. The mayor implemented a vaccine mandate for city employees that goes into effect next Friday. And it's possible that dozens of police officers could lose their jobs if they don't get vaccinated. They have to interact with the public. So that's part of the reason why they're required to get the COVID vaccine. But are you in support or opposition to this mandate?
So let me say this, Steph, is that first of all, COVID is a serious thing, right? We've been living with this for years and it's not going anywhere. We all have to take it serious. And we have to do everything we can to get vaccinated, get the booster shots and practice, the safe spacing, 6 feet apart, wearing masks, and just, upping our hygiene, right? Washing hands and all that stuff. So that's serious. A lot of people lost a lot of loved ones in the city of Providence, statewide, right? And it's serious business. And it's had a real negative impact on people's livelihoods, people's, family and friends. So we have to take it serious. And I think it's important. But
And
on the other end is that we also have to be pragmatic on how we govern our city. The city cannot have the mayor fire 60, 70 police officers and jeopardize public safety. That is a reckless action by the mayor and his staff, bottom line.
what do you think he should do instead? Either extend the deadline, allow some kind of exception.
Well, first of all, government should not be in the business of punishing people. We should be in the business of trying to make it more accessible. We need to educate our officers, maybe incentivize them in some form of fashion, whether it's monetary or another way. But we need to do something to protect public safety, because if you lose 80 officers or that many officers in the Providence Police Force next week, the city will be completely lawless. It'll be a complete ruin of the city. And I understand there are some people in politics in office now who want to abolish the police department. And I'm not one of them. That is so irresponsible. It jeopardizes everybody's health, wealth, safety, everything, and welfare. So we cannot allow that to happen, and I won't allow it to happen. What we need to do is bring in the police union, talk to the officers, try to figure out we need to figure out a better way. And there are better ways. Companies are doing it, governments are doing it, we need a better way. But this idea of just firing people because they're not is irresponsible, and people can't stand for that. And so we need to, once again, incentivize and do a better process. Extend the time, create more education, give more opportunities, whatever we need to do to help get to where we would like to go to, which is, get as many people vaccinated as possible, but not jeopardize public safety.
I also, before we wrap up, want to ask you, listen, after the ARPA ordinance, you got to move on to regular budget season. Are you committed to not raising taxes this year in Providence?
I mean, that's something I think that me and my council colleagues are going to do everything in our power not to raise taxes this year. And I think it's quite possibly will not happen. I'm committed to making every effort for that not to happen. The bottom line, as we talked about earlier, about 600 plus people passed away in the city of Providence alone from COVID, right? People lost their jobs, their businesses, all sorts of stuff. It still has a devastating impact today and a long-lasting one for tomorrow. So the last thing the city needs to be doing is to raise taxes at all different levels, whether it's business tax or property tax or tangible tax or anything like that. We need to hold the line on taxes, or if we can, lower them if we're allowed to, and do everything we can to help the people of Providence. So, we have a lot of work to do. Listen, just for people to understand, the council doesn't operate like other legislatures. We're not an agrarian schedule. We operate pretty much all year long. So this is all about letting people know that the council's here. We're taking our job and our role very serious. We have a lot of work to do, but we also need the people to, help. We want our constituents to participate. We need the council members all to participate. Everybody's got to get into the scrum. We got a lot of things we just mentioned, and we still got a budget. We still got CDBG, and we got other legislative things. And let me say something else. One of the other things we got to pay attention to is we got to get some of these buildings back online, right? Superman building is something we have to pay attention to too. If we can try to address that this year, we need to try to help that too. We need to do everything we can to start operating all the cylinders again, because right now we're not.
What do you think the city should do about the Superman building?
I think as I'm hearing more and more different ideas and stuff on how we can get this building back online. And I think we should do everything we can to help that happen, whether it's through tax credits, tax treaty, a tax program, something, or types of grants or loans, whatever we can do to help out. I think we need to take that initiative, because what people don't realize is that, I remember seeing the Masonic Temple right next to the State House. It was boarded up for decades. Now, today you see a beautiful Renaissance hotel, right? That hotel now is a thriving business based on state involvement, city involvement, tax stabilization, all that stuff. And I was part of that, and I'm proud of that. We cannot allow for the Superman building to go dormant because it's a symbol and it has a negative impact right now on the city's welfare and the state's. We can get that back online with, let's say, residential units, affordable units. Let's do it. If we can make affordable units in that building, in some form or fashion, we should take that bull by the horns and do everything we can to make that happen. We can, because definitely residential livelihood is growing in downtown Providence, and it's something that is working. So we should try to magnify that, benefit on that. And if we can make it more affordable housing in there, we should do it. So I'm excited and intrigued by some of the things I've been hearing, some stuff I've been briefed on of what's seemed like we're gonna be hearing about in the next few weeks about getting this building back online. And I think we need to take it serious. And if we're gonna do it, this is the year to do it. We can't belabor the point and give this problem to the future generation, the future administration, the future council. We need to do everything we can to try to solve it now so we can help them tomorrow.
Council President John Igliozzi, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you, your viewers and listeners, and everybody. Have a great new year. Be safe and be well.
And thank you for watching Pulse of Providence. We'll see you next time.